Yeah, this one's good. This is the Retroid Pocket Mini, their newest portable emulator that's probably just the next generation of the Retroid Pocket 2S, their last mini device. I really liked the 2S because of how small, compact, and powerful it was for its $100 or $90 price tag, depending on which model you got. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but the reason I like the Pocket Mini so much is because a lot of the issues that I had with the 2S, this fixes with the much higher price tag. I'll be comparing the Mini to the 2S a lot throughout this video because they both stand as mini devices, and as of recording, they're both still being sold on Retroid's website, so I think it's only fair. Also, these comparisons aren't me just being like, oh, look at how much better the Pocket Mini is compared to the 2S, because it is, but also, this device is great on its own. So my compliments are factual while also working as comparisons from their last mini device. Opening this thing up was a very simple and quick process, which you would know if you watched my unboxing video. The box just has the device, a manual, and a charger in it, which is really all that you need in this society where Apple sets the standard for some reason. If you watched my Neo micro review, you know that I suggested that Neo implement what Retroid does in their setup, which is that Retroid lets you select different apps and emulators to install right from the get-go. And I suggested that because it's very easy to just get going on the device when you get those all set up. But also, for me, it's fine because I can install apps, but I can also do it on my own. But it's very, very useful for someone that's never used an Android device before. If you're a noob or someone that's new to all of this and don't know like the best forks to use, of like Dolphin or Citra or Lime 3DS, it's very useful to have something like that on setup. I really like it for the reasons I just laid out, and I think that even though I did download Lime 3DS in a different fork of Dolphin I usually use afterwards, I still think it's really useful for people who are like noobs or very new to all of this and don't know what the best forks of all these emulators to use. One of the biggest changes they made between the 2S and the Mini, which you've probably already noticed just because I'm holding these next to each other, is the design. Looking back at the 2S, the design of the 2S was based on the Pocket 2, which at the time of the 2S's launch was already 3 years old, and I think it was deserving of a redesign. Now, the 2S was just kind of a spec upgrade from the 2, so I wasn't really expecting much to change, but seeing just how much has changed between the 2S and the Mini, it reminds me of just how uncomfortable the 2S can be after long play sessions, and why I'm really glad the design has changed here. Looking at the Mini in comparison, it's obvious that they overhauled the design, and I mean that in a good way. It's not just a flat slab anymore. It has some volume to it. It's not just the new grips on the back that make the design feel a lot better on the Mini, it's also the rounded sides. I've touched on this a lot in reviews. I think I touched on it in my I Owned 2 Mini review and a couple others, but even having slightly rounded sides compared to just flat sides makes the device a lot more comfortable to play because it gives the controls, usually, a lot more room to breathe. We'll touch on the controls more in a second, but them not having to be so close to the screen and each other, even just slightly, makes using them feel so much better. The grips on the back, especially, they're not the biggest grips I've ever seen in a handheld, but for such a small device, I think they're fine, and they're good. So that's a plus. Something else that should be very obvious to you when putting these two devices side by side is that they got rid of the bezel. The front is completely glass. The color I got, the SFC option, has a black front, so the screen blends in nicely at most angles, but some colors have a white front, which makes it where the screen end a lot more apparent, but it still looks much better than the 2S, which had what I consider a very ugly bezel that did not match with the rest of the device, at least in the color I chose. It obviously worked for that device. The screen on the Mini is about 0.2 inches bigger, but it's just another upgrade from the 2S that I think is really good. It being called the Mini, it is in fact a Mini. Whether it be the screen or the whole device, it's small. It's not as small as the 2S, which some might see as a negative, but I think the additions and grips are well justified, especially since it is still pocketable. It's not as pocketable, but it's still definitely pocketable. It being so small isn't so great for someone like me who prefers bigger devices just because I have bigger hands, and wrapping my hands around this device can get a little uncomfortable at times, but I think even the design of this makes it much more tolerable. But it is good that they have this being sold alongside the Pocket 5, which is about to ship in like 10 days, I think, for people who prefer smaller devices and for people who want a device they can throw in their bag and forget about. We can continue talking about the design as we talk about the controls because they kind of go hand in hand on both of these devices. The most similar between the two is the D-pad, which makes sense because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the one on the Mini does feel slightly clickier or more solid, if that makes sense. Like, they both feel really good, but the one on the Mini just feels more solid. The joysticks are Hall effect, which so were the ones on the 2S, but these are bigger and feel better to use for 3D games that this can now reliably play. And that white ring you see around the sticks also lights up, giving you pretty much an unlimited choice of what color to make it. You can even make the two sides different colors. Not sure why you'd want to, but you can. I usually just have them set to red or off because I'm not that big of an LED guy while gaming. I'm glad they are there for anyone who does like them though. More options is better than having no options. The face buttons are similar, if not the same size between the two devices, but the ones in the Mini don't feel as shallow on the 2S. I think that's just because the Mini has it's fatter. It has like a bigger back. So there's more space for the buttons to fall into, so it doesn't feel like you're pressing against the back of the device the whole time. The triggers, I think, are the biggest difference between the two models because the Mini isn't just a flat slab like the 2S is. The triggers feel big and nice to use. They feel like they have a lot more pressure sensitivity than the ones in the 2S as you push down. It's not as harsh of a push is what I'm trying to say. The triggers on the 2S are good for what they are, but obviously a device that's more ergonomic and bigger on the back is gonna have better triggers than the device that's literally flat on the back, aside from the big triggers. The screen on here isn't even close. The Mini beats the 2S by such a wide margin, which I mean, it should for like an $100 difference, but comparing a 960p display with a 480p display, it's no contest. 480p for the screen on the 2S was the most outdated thing about it, in my opinion, because I understand for a small device, for a cheap device, you want to go with a low quality screen to keep the price down, but like not even 720, has to be 480. It made the games look more authentic, I guess, but with the power that the Mini now holds in its Snapdragon 865 chip and 6GB of RAM compared to the 2S's T610 chip and 3 or 4GB of RAM depending on the model, I'll take 960p, please. Thank you. I prefer the better screen and being able to upscale games. Thank you very much. The Mini screen though, it's beautiful. I don't absolutely love it, and I think that's mostly just because of the size. I wish it was a little bigger, but I think the size is probably one of the main selling points, so maybe I should just shut up. I do love how there's no bezel like I touched on earlier. It makes it so you don't have to worry about some ugly color being the bezel and not matching with the rest of the device like I had to deal with on my 2S. It's an AMOLED display, so obviously it's gonna look really good, but I've been trying a lot of different games on here, mostly GameCube games, but I've been shuffling around a lot, and every game I've tried has looked beautiful. There's really not much more I can say about it before I start repeating myself, but it looks damn good. So there is one thing, what I'm about to talk about, that I think I might actually prefer on the 2S, and that's the speakers. The speakers on the Mini don't sound bad. They can get much louder than the speakers on the 2S can. I just don't think they sound as clear, if that makes sense. The speakers on the Mini sound kind of muffled in my opinion. They don't sound bad, and I appreciate how much louder they can get, but I'm worried that that came with the compromise of quality. Again, they sound good. I just think the speakers on the 2S sound better. That might be because the speaker grills on the 2S look like they're bigger than the ones on the Mini, but I don't know. Obviously, if you're going to be listening to like video game audio off of this thing, you're going to be using the speakers a lot. So I think it's important in that aspect. And I am kind of disappointed because of that, but they sound fine enough. So it's not really that big of a deal. Okay, quick disclaimer before we start talking about the software on this thing. Back when Retroid announced this and the Pocket 5, they announced that a new game launcher would be released alongside them. But at the time of recording, nothing has been released for the Pocket Mini, or seemingly anything but the Pocket 5, which only reviewers have at this point. I'm honestly not sure if it'll ever come to anything but the Pocket 4 and 5, because they only advertised it alongside the Pocket 5, and they said it would come to the Pocket 4, so I'm not sure if it would come to the Pocket Mini, ever. But I did just want to mention it in case someone knows what I'm talking about and is confused. Okay, back to the main topic. The software experience on here is pretty much the exact same as their last few devices. The Pocket 2S had a different background and didn't feel as smooth, but in terms of its design, it's just normal Android. Their launcher works the same as well, so there's really no distinction there. This all looks better on the Mini. It looks more modern and aesthetically pleasing, but it functions almost exactly the same. I guess the biggest difference is now the Mini has the same power options that the 4 has and the 5 will have, letting you overclock it a bit, I guess. It's not that big of a difference, but if you're pushing this device to its limits, it probably helps. The battery life on here is pretty good. It has a 4000 milliamp hour battery, which is the same as the Pocket 2S, but I feel like it drains slightly quicker on here. It still lasts a good while though, which is important because gaming is important, and if the battery dies fast while gaming, that's not good. What I will say though, don't leave this thing in sleep mode for too long. Retroid devices have never really been good at keeping their battery percentage while in sleep mode. If you leave a Retroid device like at 100% and you leave it just in sleep mode, like on your desk or something, it will be dead within like 2 days, which is very frustrating, but it's also like, it's in sleep mode. So if you're planning on charging this thing and putting it in your bag, make sure you turn it off fully, or if you're gonna leave it somewhere, make sure you turn it off fully so the battery just doesn't slowly drain, and when you wanna play it again, it's dead, because no one wants that. Emulation, unlike the battery, is drastically different on the Mini compared to the 2S. While the 2S could play some GameCube games at a good frame rate, the Mini can play pretty much all GameCube and Wii games at a good frame rate, at a 4:3 resolution aspect ratio, and upscaled to a good resolution. Like I said earlier, all the games look really good on this display, and I like having a device that can play GameCube and Wii at a good frame rate in 4:3 because you can play the games at their original aspect ratio, at least for GameCube, and not have to sacrifice space on the screen. And as much as I love using the widescreen hack when you're playing on a device with a 16:9 display, sometimes it doesn't work out that well. And especially in GameCube games, sometimes it just doesn't look right when a thing like loads in weirdly if it's like outside the original aspect ratio. So just having a device like this that can play games at their original aspect ratio, but also at a good frame rate, is really cool. Also, Wii games work at 4:3. I've been playing Mario Kart Wii and a bunch of other games at 4:3. So it still works out. Obviously, most of them were developed with 16:9 in mind, but this was still the generation where a lot of people had 4:3 TVs, so they had to keep that in mind. So that especially on here is really cool that it's still here. Back to what games you can play on this thing. I've mostly been playing GameCube and Wii games over the past 2 weeks, which means that anything below those will play with ease. 3DS and DS are included in those as well. You could try Nintendo Switch games on here, but I just didn't see the point because of the 4:3 display. I feel like most of the people buying this thing are not going to be trying to play the like highest end games or the newest games through an emulator. I feel like it's mostly going to be retro titles. For that, I'm waiting for my Pocket 5. For this, I'm using it for GameCube, Wii, like SNES, and anything else that uses a 4:3 display as its main aspect ratio, because it just looks better. If I play something that's like 16:9 on here, it just doesn't look as good. 3DS, I think, gets a pass because the top screen isn't exactly 16:9, so it fills up most of the screen, and it plays the games well, so it's fine. GameCube, Wii, and 3DS all being playable at great frame rates bodes well for anything before those to be played well on this thing that has at least an Android emulator that you can play them on. And to be honest, I'm not sure there's much more you'd want to play on here besides those consoles. Like I said earlier, I've mostly been playing GameCube and Wii games on here because I feel like that's the limit of what people would want to play on a device with a 4:3 display. Anything more and it feels like overkill. And that's honestly who I'd recommend this to. Anyone who wants a small device that can play Wii or GameCube games, but it's small enough to like fit in your pocket or just be a mini device. If that's what you're looking for, I think we've got a home run here. I understand why they still have the 2S up on their storefront, especially since it is so much cheaper than the Mini, but I think the Mini trounces it in every way so much that it justifies being so much more expensive. Of course, I wish it was cheaper, It's really hard to recommend a device that's trying to fill a mini hole in the market when it's $200, which is more expensive than pretty much every other mini device on the market right now. But I think what you get for that money justifies the price tag at least a little bit. But yeah, I really like this thing, and I think anyone that wants to play the GameCube and Wii library really badly, or anything below, will too. The price tag might put some people off, but I think that what you get for the money, including the better display, better controls, bigger back, more comfortable design, more than makes up for it and gives you worth for that money. But what do you guys think? Is this the mini device you've been waiting for? Will you be buying one? Or does it not live up to your expectations and you won't be buying one? Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll be seeing you guys next week. Goodbye!